Thank you very much, Anne, for that incredible speech. We now call upon the final speaker of opposition, and indeed the final speaker of this evening, the Venerable Dr. Miranda Threlfall-Holmes. She's the Archdeacon of Liverpool and is a member of the Church of England's General Synod and Archbishop's Council, where she advocates for an inclusive feminist Christianity. Her publications range from her doctoral thesis on medieval monastic economies to books on prayers for children. She read history at Christ and is indeed a life member of the Cambridge Union Society. Miranda, you have the eyes and the ears of the House.
I did the maths. It was 28 years, 5 months, 6 days, and about 7.5 hours ago that my now husband and I sat in Café Rouge, just a couple of hundred yards away, 3 days before our wedding was due in Christ Chapel. And I made to him all the arguments that we have heard from this side of the floor as to why we should call off the wedding. I wasn't best pleased. I was terrified. I was a feminist. I didn't want to become property. I didn't want to be given away. I didn't want to take his name and lose my identity. I was absolutely appalled at what I was doing. So we sat there and we went through all the, okay, well, we can call it off. That's okay. It won't be that expensive. We don't just graduated. We weren't having an expensive wedding. We can do this. And we got to the point of thinking, well, what will we do next then? Okay, so the wedding won't go ahead. We won't do it. What will we do? And well, we'll just go back to our flat in Newcastle and carry on living together. At which point I thought, hang on, listen to yourself. Well, what difference will it make then? And we got married. And we've been married for coming up to 29 years this year. Because what I realised, having made all those arguments, which are strong arguments, absolutely cannot blame you for making those arguments, I did myself. What I realised was, actually, it's not marriage that oppresses women, it's men that oppress women. It's patriarchy that oppresses women. As my colleague said, doesn't help, does it, if you cohabit? It's not husbands that kill women, it's men. It's people that you've swiped on Tinder who don't like the fact that you didn't want a second date. That's what's dangerous.
Point of information.
You're going to go, hashtag not all men, because if so, no.
As an American, it's not as a man. As an American, isn't that somewhat similar to saying guns don't kill people, people kill people?
Interesting. Think about that later. Marriage has absolutely been oppressive. Marriage has absolutely been oppressive, but it is not inherently oppressive. And actually, one of the things that I find really interesting, having started off as a historian, is how much we project back into history what we see now. Marriage has not always been, all the things that we hear about property and so on, absolutely true, but we're talking about a very particular elite view of marriage. That was not the marriage that most people had. There was a fascinating article in New Scientist a few weeks ago about a study on matrilineal DNA of Bronze Age skeletons, where the scientists didn't really believe what they'd found because they've always assumed that historical societies were patriarchal, just like they always assume that if a skeleton is buried with a sword, it must have been a man. But they found, when they investigated this DNA, they found to their great surprise that actually in Bronze Age Celtic societies, men left their families to go to where the woman lived, which is a feature across the world of matriarchal or much more equal societies. It's simply not true that all through history, the patriarchal assumptions of marriage and relationships that we have now have been the case. In the Bible, marriage is very often used as a symbol of God's relationship with people. Now, you might be thinking, oh, God, she's going all biblical on me. Don't worry. It's a beautiful, beautiful image, but it is not a gender-based image. And trust me, having been ordained for 20 years, if I hear another person tell me that God's a man and that the image of God and a beautiful marriage with creation means that God is inherently male and that marriage is inherently about men and women, I might come back to my friend with the guns. It's an image which is about the quality of relationship, that quality of choosing to commit to someone, which, as my friend up there said, is just an incredibly beautiful idea. I've been a vicar for 21 years. I've done a lot of weddings. I never fail to get a shiver down my spine when I hear people say to one another, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. They are incredible vows.
The full line is love, cherish, and obey.
That hasn't been the case since 1928, and I refuse to do a wedding with that in it. Nobody says that anymore. They are incredible vows. To be able to have the quality of commitment to say that to another human being and hear it said to you is incredible. Yeah, it doesn't always work out, but what an amazing aspiration for your life. What an amazing aspiration, and what an incredible image of that quality of love and commitment that we believe God has for us. I've got a T-shirt with the definition of feminism on it, which says feminism is the radical notion that women are people too. And we quite often hear about marriage being between a man and a woman, and of course, for most places and most people, it is. But it's not fundamentally about a particular construction of gender relationships that a particular point in 21st century Western society wants to see it as. It's a quality of a relationship between two people. If we don't want patriarchal, oppressive marriages, what we need to do, friends, is dismantle patriarchy. That's a much, much bigger challenge than simply deciding not to have an expensive wedding. And don't get distracted, because honestly, I think the patriarchy want us to get distracted by the bling of weddings or arguments like this about whether marriage is a good or a bad thing, because it distracts our attention from the really hard work we need to do of dismantling patriarchy. I've done a lot of weddings. I give this spiel, a version of it, in my marriage preparation to couples. I tell them to think, because actually it's not the marriage that's dangerous, it's the having the children that's dangerous. That's when people suddenly find their gender roles are starting to fall into particular things. And I say to them, don't come in on your father's arm and get handed over like a piece of property. You don't want to do that. Do you know how many couples have taken me up on that and come in together, walked up the aisle together like my husband and I did 29 years ago? Two couples. And do you know what everyone else has said? Oh, I can't do that because it would upset my dad too much. Friends, we are not going to dismantle patriarchy without hurting a few men's feelings along the way.
How are we supposed to dismantle the patriarchy if we keep marrying our oppressors?
It's a really good question. Don't marry the ones who are going to oppress you. Ask the questions first. Ask the questions. Ask the question, are we going to take it in turns to move for each other's job? One really good test question is when it comes to having children, if you decide to have children, and you start talking about the cost of childcare, which is ridiculous, is he going to say, oh, actually the childcare, darling, is 15 grand, so it's probably not worth you going back to work? Because no, you're paying 15 grand so that you can both work, if that's what you choose to do. There are questions like that about how you intend to run your life. You don't have to use the words husband and wife. Ooh, they make me cringe. I call my partner or my spouse. There are ways of doing a marriage, as so many people have said, which are equal, and where you can choose not to oppress one another.
Point of information. You
Right.
painted a lovely picture of religious marriages. Why does your church still not recognise same-sex couples?
It is an extremely good point, and believe me, we are working on it extremely hard. I've just come with the General Synod is in session this week. I said to Jess when I arrived, I said, you've got really angry feminist Miranda tonight, because after the debates we've had this afternoon, I'm incredibly cross with the Church of England. But believe me, I'm working on it, and it is something we are not doing right at the moment. My top tip, if you want an equal marriage, is get a cleaner, because those gender roles are the hardest thing to change. But friends, that is not about whether you're married or not. That is any relationship you'll ever have. Thank you.
Cleared? I just have a few notices. If you feel inspired by tonight's debate, we have 2 debates next week. We have a comedy debate on Monday and the usual Thursday night debate with student speaker slots on each side. We also have the Laramie Project play in the Chamber this weekend, so make sure to get your tickets. And we also have the Baldwin-Buckley anniversary on Tuesday. The fourth speech this evening is going to go to Mandy from Jesus College. If you can hang around after, we'll get your name and email and everything sorted. In this chamber, we vote with our feet. Ayes to the right, noes to the left, and abstentions through the middle. We'll reveal the result in the bar in a short time. Thank you again to our speakers, and have a lovely evening.